So, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us this evening. I know that this isn't light entertainment for a weekday evening. Regulatory reform is not the most thrilling topic, so we genuinely appreciate you giving up your time to engage with it. So we have sort of organised this webinar because the consultation really does matter. It affects the structure of our profession, and as the BFBA, we believe it is important to understand it properly rather than react with headlines or snippets online. So as an association, we will submit a formal response, but the consultation carries far more weight when the profession responds collectively. So the more farriers who engage and submit a thoughtful response, the stronger our voice becomes. So volume matters and numbers really do truly matter. So we really do encourage everyone not just to listen tonight, but to consider responding yourselves. So we also have members of the executive committee and colleagues in the audience this evening who bring different areas of expertise. And if questions arise over this evening, please, or anything that's said over this evening, please put them in the chat box. We will gather them and do our very best to address them at the end of the night. This is a professional discussion, so it is about understanding what is proposed and what it actually does mean to our farriery industry. So with that, I'm now really pleased to introduce Mr. Malcolm Morley. Malcolm is the Director of the UK Operations for World Horse Welfare, and he is actually the past president of the British Veterinary Association. So he brings a balanced and experienced perspective on how we arrived at this point in the veterinary reform and the wider regulatory landscape. So Malcolm will briefly outline the background and the drivers behind the proposed changes before we move into the farriery implications. So Malcolm, over to you.
Thanks, Abby. I'll see if I can share my screen. Doubtless I'll probably share the wrong thing, but let's give it a shot. See if that's working. Is that looking like it's working? Perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, just quick introduction, just so you know who's talking. Malcolm Morley, I'm a vet. I'm going to try not to vet-splain this. That'll be the next thing after mansplaining. I've been in veterinary practice for 30 years as a practicing vet, and it was really one of the honours of my career to be a president of the British Veterinary Association a couple of years back when lots of this was being talked about. But now I am the UK Director of World Horse Welfare, and I'm not really talking on behalf of World Horse Welfare in this presentation. This is my personal view, but having had that background with BVA. So what am I going to cover? What is the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons? What's wrong with the Veterinary Surgeons Act? And then why now? Why is this all happening at this moment? So fundamentally, the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, although it's called a Royal College, is a regulator. And we have this 1966 Act called the Veterinary Surgeons Act, which is the piece of legislation that enables the RCVS to act as a regulator. So as a regulator, they maintain a register of vets and also registered vet nurses, although I'll talk about a bit more about that in a minute. And they regulate vets' conduct. So if vets do something that falls outside the bounds of what they should be doing, the RCVS can investigate complaints and even potentially remove people from the register. They also regulate vet education and the standards required. But why is this regulator called a Royal College? So typically, if we think about, there's the Royal College of Physicians, there's all sorts of Royal Colleges. Typically, that's a professional body which it exists because of a thing called a Royal Charter, and it's set to maintain standards for that profession. So it's all about training, defining training qualifications, professional standards, And so that is typically what a Royal College is about. But the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons is like no other Royal College. It's a very unusual body in that it is a Royal College that regulates. So it does two things. I've actually just taken this as text, which is copy and pasted from the RCVS website, which certainly when I copied it said the RCVS is made up of three distinct organisations. So it's a regulator, that's part A. B, it acts as a royal college with powers under this royal charter. And then there's the RCVS Trust, which is a charity aspect of it. But let's think of it mostly as these two things, a regulator and a royal college. This royal charter, it was first in 1844. It's been updated several times, most recently in 2015. And interestingly, it is under that royal charter in 2015 that the RCVS is able to award qualifications and register and regulate veterinary nurses. So they're really they're in a really odd place. They're actually regulating vet nurses through a royal college function. And this, as I'll talk about in a minute, is a significant aspect of how this act is really out of date. And they also inspect and accredit practice standards. So we do have a thing to do with veterinary practice standards, but it's a completely voluntary scheme at the moment. My practice was part of it when I was in practice, but practices don't have to be. And we'll touch more on that in a minute. Just a quick thing, everybody gets this mixed up. So the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons is our Royal College and regulator. That's not the same as the Royal Veterinary College, which is essentially the vet school in London. And if you get mixed up, yeah, so does most of the veterinary profession. So what is wrong with the Veterinary Surgeons Act? Well, it's a 1966 act. The Beatles came out with Yellow Submarine. It's the last time England managed to win the World Cup. This is so far back in time, and that gives you a real sense of just how out of date this is. At the moment, I think a really good analogy for where we're at is that we are the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons can only regulate individual vets and vet nurses. If you think about this in terms of airlines, this is a bit like regulating airlines by regulating pilots, but without any regulation of airlines. And you think now these massive corporate airlines, it would be absolutely ridiculous if the only regulation was through the pilots. And that's pretty much what's happening at the moment with vets. All of the onus and regulation is on individuals, when certainly in the current landscape with a lot of corporatization in the veterinary profession, that there is no regulation of that. So it's disproportionately on the people. And everybody involved in the veterinary sector pretty much agrees that there needs to be regulation of veterinary businesses. What else is wrong with it? Well, since that 1966 Act, we now recognise the really important role of vet nurses, whether they're equine vet nurses working in equine practices or whether they're registered veterinary nurses working small animal practice. But the law doesn't properly recognise them. It's not a protected title. So any of us here could call ourselves vet nurses. And that certainly doesn't give proper respect to these professionals. What you might call the sort of disciplinary processes of the RCVS is very punitive. So a lot of it doesn't have much flexibility. It's sort of set up to punish vets who do the wrong thing. And the only thing that they can really do is strike off or suspend vets from the register. There aren't other sanctions. And what we need is a system which is much more forward-looking. It's about whether that person is fit to practice rather than being backward-looking and punitive. As well as vet nurses, we also recognise that the whole landscape has changed. We've got cattle foot trimmers, we've got equine dental technicians, musculoskeletal professionals, behaviourists, and in the farm sector, we've got vet techs who are almost like the vet nurses of the farm animal vet world. All of these people are important allied professionals that are recognised by the vet profession, but none of them fit within this Veterinary Surgeons Act. Another great example of why it's so out of date. If we think about equine dentistry at the moment, we've got vets, we've got equine dental technicians, many of them really well qualified, and we've got a lot of just unregistered equine dentists. And again, any of you in this room might start doing some of these things with no background. It doesn't protect horse owners and it doesn't protect horses. So why now? Well, this has been going on for a long time. Early discussions were in the 1990s when the government and the profession first started to acknowledge that this act was increasingly out of date, with many of the concerns I've talked about disciplinary procedures, role of vet nurses, modern practice structures. But that was the first sort of consideration, and nothing really came out of that time. There was a more of a formal process to look at legislative reform from 2003 to 2008. And in 2008, the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons produced detailed proposals for a new Veterinary Surgeons Act and submitted them to government. I wasn't very involved at that time. The key thing is that there wasn't time by government. This is a really common theme. MPs and the government are interested in what the public needs and or what the public wants. That's what MPs are driven by. And if their constituents aren't saying we need this, even if something is out of date, it's not going to be taken forward by government, and there'll be other competing priorities. Another thing, although I wasn't around at that time, is that people say that the regulator, the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, and the BVA, the representative body, were not entirely on the same page. And that is important. I think it's a really important message today, is that you need to see your profession really trying to be on the same page as much as possible. In more recent times, the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons carried out a big review and then a consultation, which was over 4 years, looking at the future of the Veterinary Surgeons Act. So just to show you that our profession has been considering this for a really long time, and this has been a really significant piece of work for the regulator. And then BVA, which I was the president of BVA, not the RCVS, the representative body, so a bit like BFBA. We, along with BVNA, the representative body for veterinary nurses, produced a response to that. And we didn't agree entirely. It would be quite strange if a regulator and a representative body agreed entirely. But actually, there's been a really big focus on trying to narrow that gap, trying to work together, and this recognition that as a profession, if we have a more coherent voice, then that is a really good way to work with government. If you go to government and the profession is all saying different things, your voice is not coherent and is less likely to be heard. When I was BVA president, we were saying this again and again, and we were telling politicians, Veterinary Surgeons Act is out of date. It's not just about us. It's about other allied professionals. It's about vet nurses. But still, it's very difficult to get this to land. It felt like we need something else. Well, that missing piece of the jigsaw, as it turns out, came along. And that is really the Competition and Markets Authorities look at the veterinary sector. I like to think of this as the Competition and Markets Authority looking at the veterinary industry, looking at how it works. Our profession works within that industry. And although it's been really looking at the industry, our profession, it feels like, has taken a lot of flack. Sometimes vets has been portrayed as money grabbers and scammers, when I know only too well that most of my colleagues are just really working hard at the coalface. They feel quite bruised and battered by what's come out of the CMA. But underneath it all, there is good things, because when the CMA has highlighted different things, they've highlighted multiple concerns, But the bottom one of this list, they've been saying the regulatory framework is outdated and may longer be fit for purpose. And finally, our profession, suddenly this message that we've been given, what we've been giving, seems to be resonating with government. And all of a sudden, we have got this consultation. Thank goodness. That's what we need, because this act is just so out of date. A couple of quick points to wrap up with. One of the things that you will see is that the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons have published their response to this government consultation. A lot of the consultation is about their governance and how the RCVS are operating. You'll see that a lot of the RCVS's response, if you look at it, is saying there's no problem here. We're fine. We're doing okay. We don't need reform. I would just suggest that that within farriery, it's worth thinking about how a consultation response comes across. If you just say we're fine, there's nothing here to modernise, and I would encourage you to just not give a response which just says please don't go looking here. Throughout all of this evening, what I don't want to do is being a vet who's, telling farriery what to do. I think it's really important that you come to your own conclusions. One of my other things that I would say really strongly is don't be those people who say, we don't fully know what this is, but we don't like this. I think it's great that you're all getting together to really understand this problem better. So look, I'll stop there. Hope that's just a bit of useful background. Happy to ask any questions. A couple of my colleagues who are currently an officer and one of the key team members from BVA are also in this webinar, and they will maybe be able to answer some questions as well. But I'll stop there for the moment. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Malcolm. That was really smashing. And what we'll do is we'll save all the questions to for when we get to the end. So I'll keep going. And like I say, if you have any questions, guys, just put it in the box and we'll do our best to answer it at the very end. If I just share my screen now, hang on. Two sets. So what I want to do is just talk you through sort of where we've come from, where we're going, and how we understand this. And for people that really haven't read it and don't really know where they're going, hopefully this will help you. So before we move into the detail of everything, I sort of want to explain the work that's already been taken place behind the scenes. So the Executive Committee of the BFBA has spent considerable time reviewing this consultation properly. So we've held focus meetings, we've examined the words carefully, and we've discussed the potential implications from the regulatory, legal, and practical perspectives. So we've engaged with DEFRA, the Farriers Registration Council, and the Worshipful Company of Farriers, alongside internal and external discussions to ensure our understanding is balanced and informed. So there have been sort of robust conversations, as there should be when a statutory structure of a profession is under review. We've had considered not only regulatory principles, but the reality that farriery is a predominantly sole trader, small business profession operating on the ground every day. So the position presented tonight really reflects careful consideration and collective responsibility. So our duty is to protect the long-term integrity, independence, and sustainability of farriery. So with that context, sort of let us step forward and look carefully at what actually is being proposed. So I'm sorry if this is going over old ground with some people, but I just think everyone needs to kind of come from the same page, really. So where we are now, the reform sort of proposes modernising legislation that is nearly, as Malcolm said, 60 years old. And tonight we're focusing specifically on our four structural areas. So what they've brought up is license to practice, fitness to practice, regulation of veterinary healthcare businesses, so regulation of business, and governance reform. We'll look at each one sort of objectively, good and bad, so try and give an overall perception or how we've seen it. But before we examine the 4 reform areas, we kind of need to understand one key concept, which is massive, and that is the scope of practice. So scope feeds into everything in this reform. It links directly to who is legally responsible, who carries liability if something goes wrong, who must hold a license to practice, and who faces fitness to practice proceedings. So sort of at its simplest, scope of practice means what you are legally allowed to do and where does the authority stop. So it determines what counts as a veterinary act, what a farrier may lawfully do independently, and what farrier requires referral, when may farriery require referral or authorization. So for farriers, scope is anchored in statute through the Registration Act, and the regulation is via the Registration Council. And the Act makes it unlawful for anyone who is not registered to shoe a horse. So this is clear statutory protection of the Shoeing Act. However, areas such as trimming and barefoot trimming sits in a more complex territory, which is why legal drafting and definition really matters. Everything we are discussing tonight ultimately connects back to whether future legislation clearly defines veterinary acts and farriery acts in a way that perceive expertise and autonomy and welfare standards. So the consultation is effectively silent. The one thing that I have really realised is that the consultation is really silent on this matter, which isn't helpful because license to practice and fitness to practice only make sense once scope is defined. So your license so if you can't license someone or discipline someone without defining what they are actually authorised to do. So if the legal lines move, the practical lines move, and we won't feel this. So basically, if the legal lines move, the practical lines will move with it. So we won't feel this in the wording of the Act, but you will feel it as a farrier the first time you're told you need to be authorised to do something that you've actually always been trained and you are competent in doing. This is where this will then actually really, it will be at face value. So with your license to practice, sort of the proposal is moving from a registration-based system to a formal license to practice model. So a license is not just entry onto a register, it's an ongoing permission to practice granted and maintained by the regulator. So under this new model, a license would require renewal. Conditions could be attached and practicing becomes contingent on holding an active license. So crucially, where allied professionals are incorporated in the Veterinary Surgeons Act, the consultation indicates repeal of the Farriers Registration Act. So that would mean that farriers would move from regulation by the FRC to regulation under the Veterinary Association framework. So this is not an administrative adjustment. This is actually a structural change. This is quite important. And the principle or the benefits of this is a license to practice model can offer clarity. It provides a visible mechanism showing that a professional holds current permission to practice. So it can align with modern healthcare regulatory systems and may increase public confidence through standardization. So it can align, so it also provides a clear structure for attaching conditions where appropriate. But with this comes a risk. So the risk for farriers is not really administrative, it is massively structural. So if farriers were incorporated under the VSA and the Farriers Registration Act repealed, the profession would move from its own standalone statutory framework into a broader veterinary legislation model. So that would change who regulates the farriery, how scope is defined, and where professional autonomy really sits. So how delegation and oversight may also apply. At present, the Farriers Registration Act makes it unlawful for anyone not registered to shoe a horse. So that creates a clear statutory foundation specific to farriery. But under the veterinary-led framework, farriery would sit within a wider healthcare legislation rather than its own dedicated act. So this is, as I said earlier, a massive structural shift. So there's also a forward-looking regulatory consideration. In other healthcare systems, licence models have evolved over time for simple renewal to formal revalidation or certification. So requiring practitioners to demonstrate ongoing competence at different intervals. So while this consultation does not explicitly propose recertification for farriers, license-based systems can move into that direction. So there is room for this to happen. In a small sole trader profession, mandatory requalification or recertification would carry significant cost and sort of operational impact, so massively expensive. The key question is not whether regulation is necessary. It's actually whether replacing a professional specific statutory framework with a broader healthcare model it's whether replacing it with a broader healthcare model strengthens the proportional public protection or weakens the long-term professional independence. So put simply, it's the difference between standing on our own statute or sitting under actually someone else's umbrella. So I'll just pause for a second here, and the word repel, it does sound sort of technical, but it is really actually quite significant. So repel means that the Farriers Registration Act does not evolve, it actually completely disappears. So if the objective is to modernise or clarify scope or incorporate something like Northern Ireland, those aims could actually be achieved within our existing statutory framework. Northern Ireland could be brought into the Farriers registration structure, and scope could be refined by amendment, and standards could be strengthened without dismantling the foundations. So the real question isn't whether reform is needed, it's whether reform requires removal, and those are not actually automatically the same thing. And the other thing that really is important is professional positioning. It really does matter. So it isn't about rivalry. It isn't about resisting veterinary oversight. Farriers and vets work exceptionally well together. I mean, we're always, collaborating, and that collaboration is vital for animal welfare, horse welfare. But collaboration and incorporation are really not the same thing. So at present, farriers stand on its own statute under the Farriers Registration Act. And if this statute was repealed and farriery moved inside the veterinary legislation, the legal anchor of the profession would change. So that might not feel different on day one, but legislation shapes interpretation over time. So boundary questions, scope decisions, and authority in slightly grey areas. So those things are influenced by where a profession sits in law and who ultimately defines those boundaries. So that is why professional positioning really matters and why it deserves careful thought. So working together is not the issue. What is the issue is actually where farriery sits in law. So with their proposed fitness to practice, under this proposed reform, fitness to practice would actually operate through a three-stage system or a three-stage model. So triage, case examination, and formal hearing would be required. And the standard of proof would be the civil standard which is the balance of probabilities rather than criminal threshold. So the framework formalises the interim measures, and this clarifies available sanctions. So it is important to be precise here, really. The concept of impairment is not actually a new thing. The current farriery regulatory system already actually considers impairment. So even if different terminology is actually being used, that does include conduct, competence, health, criminal convictions, and also matters that could bring the profession sort of into disrepute. So what changes under this proposal is not actually the principle of the impairment, but actually sort of the structure around it. So if farriery were incorporated into the BSA framework, this structure healthcare style sort of model would replace the current system operated by the Farriers Registration Council. Put simply, fitness to practice under this model becomes about one question. Are you currently safe to be on the road shoeing horses? I think the benefits of this is a structured three-stage model provides clearer procedural steps and defined decision-making points. So using the civil standard aligns with modern professional regulators. So formal triage may allow early filtering and sort of concerns before escalation. So in principle, the model aims to enhance consistency, transparency, and public confidence with regulatory sort of outcomes. So when it boils down to it, it is about the consistency, the same framework, and the same sort of standard, the same process every time. So it's very clear and very consistent. But if farriery were incorporated into the VSA, the current farriery-specific fitness to practice system would be replaced by a larger healthcare style regulatory model. So this is, again, it's a structural change. It's not simply procedural adjustment. So firstly, it's procedural complexity. A three-stage model with a formalized case management increases documentation and structure. So in a small profession, this may extend timelines and increase costs compared to a tailored framework. And then you've got proportionality. So the current system allows flexibility. So it includes advisory outcomes for a lower level matter. So a more formalized model, it may actually reduce the agility and escalate cases more quickly into a formal proceedings. And then you've got structural alignment. So many sanctions are designed for a multi-person clinician environment with a supervisor or more than one person within that structure. Farriery is predominantly a sole trader or micro business profession. So conditions on independent working or supervisory requirements may operate very differently and actually more severely in this context because we actually all or most of us work alone. And we move on to expertise. So the existing framework is built around farriery. If decisions within a broader healthcare regulatory if decisions are made in a broader healthcare regulator without embedded farriery expertise or technical nuance cases, this risks without if you haven't got sufficient tradesmen within this, the understanding is missed. So sufficient trade understanding is really important. So the question is not whether regulation should exist, it's whether replacing a professional specific system with a large healthcare model strengthens proportional public protection, or actually the fit weakens regulation and the profession it governs. So the only way I can put it is, should a system built for a hospital fit a profession that works out the back of a van? And whether the people judging farriers are actually people that truly understand farriery. Are they within the farriery profession? Then we move on to business. So regulation of business. At present, regulation focuses on individual professionals, as Malcolm said earlier, and the proposal introduces power to regulate veterinary healthcare businesses as entities as well. This means large veterinary practices or corporate groups could be subject to oversight, not only at practitioner level, but also at organisational level. So including governance, leadership and systems. So the intent is to strengthen accountability in complex business structures where responsibility does not rest sort of on one individual alone. It's about regulating the practice structure, not just the people working inside it. The benefits of this, in principle, this aims to improve accountability sort of in large corporate practice structures where ownership, management and clinical work are separated. But business level regulations can sort of strengthen government oversight and ensure systems do not undermine professional standards. So it allows accountability to sit not just with the individual vet, but with the organisation itself. That may improve transparency and public confidence in large multi-veterinary groups. However, and this is important, farrier is not structured in that way. We all know that. And we are predominantly, as I said, sole traders and micro businessmen. So while the principle may make sense in a corporate veterinary context, its relevance in farrier is really actually quite limited. So this does solve a corporate vet problem, but doesn't sort of obviously solve a farriery one. So the risks to us, I feel, sort of the proposal to regulate healthcare businesses is primarily aimed at the corporate veterinary structure, large practices with multi-clinicians and layered management and complex sort of government structures. As I said, and we all know, farrier is not actually built in that way. Over 90% of farriers operate as sole traders, and we do not run clinical premises. We do not operate multi-partner governance boards, and we are mobile, independent, professional, regulated under separate primary legislation. So business level regulation is not automatically directed at farriers or farriery, but however, if farriery were incorporated in this veterinary surgeon's frame, the drafting would determine whether any organisational obligation extended to allied professionals. So if a corporate regulation model were applied, directly or indirectly, to a sole trader profession, it would introduce sort of compliance structures designed for complex healthcare organisations rather than the independent practitioner. So it might include like mandatory business compliance frameworks, increased indemnity expectations, formal governance documentation, inspection or oversight structures, inspections of premises, and blurred lines between sort of personal and business liabilities. Everything becomes a little bit blurred. So for a corporate veterinary group, this is all absorbed within the infrastructure. But for an individual farrier, it becomes additional costs, additional administrations, and potential financial exposure. There's also what I think is a positioning issue. So if veterinary businesses become the central regulated unit of care, farriers working alongside them may increasingly be seen as operating within a veterinary-led structure rather than an independent statutory profession. So that shift would not be immediate, but over time it alters professional standing. So regulation would be proportionate to risk and relative of professional structures. So applying a corporate healthcare model to a small mobile statutory trade must be justified by clear evidence of sort of added public protection. Sort of reverting back to what I said earlier, You don't use a hospital rule book to regulate someone working out the back of a van. They're very different, very different. Then we move on to governance. So governance reform means creating a formal separation between those who regulate and discipline the profession and those who represent and support it. So this aligns veterinary regulation with the broader healthcare governance models, where regulatory bodies sort of are structurally independent from professional leadership organisations. So however, governance is not just structural theory. So however, governance is not just structural theory. Governance is where scope of practice is defined. So this is where it's really important. It's where standards are written, codes of conduct are set, education requirements are shaped, and disciplinary frameworks are determined. So these decisions directly influence what a profession is legally permitted to do and how it evolves. So the critical question for farriery is not simply about separation, it's about expertise. If governance structures determine scope and standards do not include sufficient farriery-specific expertise at the right level, decisions may lack the technical nuance required for specialist statutory trade. So governance reform therefore affects not only structure, but long-term professional definition. It's really important. Governance is where the rule book gets written. So it really does matter who is in the room when it is drafted. We need a seat on that. We need a seat on that board. The benefits of this, the governance reform does aim to create clearer structural independence between regulation and representation. So by separating those two disciplines from those who promote or support the profession, it does seek to remove sort of perceived conflict of interest. So the lay majority oversight is intended to strengthen external scrutiny and reinforce that public protection in the primary focus. But this model aligns veterinary governance with other healthcare regulators, so where institutional separation is considered as best practice. So in principle, the formal independence may enhance transparency and public confidence by making regulatory decisions making regulatory decision-making sort of demonstratively impartial. The governance separation becomes standard following public inquiries into regulatory independence. But the principle is to avoid perceived conflict between representing and disciplining a profession. So reinforcing public confidence. It's all about reinforcing public confidence. So it's designed really to show the public that the referee isn't on the same team as the team players. But as farriery is small, statutory regulation, the structural reform must be proportionate to the scale. So we understand why separation of the regulatory and the representative function has become the direction of travel in this model healthcare governance. Independence, it really does matter. But in a profession of one size, formal separation does then carry real structure and financial implications that it must be carefully modelled. So the consultation doesn't automatically create two boards, but structural separation would require like distinct governance arrangements, sort of accountability structures and funding mechanisms. So this could actually mean that separate governance frameworks would arise, separate decision-making bodies would be there, separate administrative systems would have to be in place, and separate funding systems as well, or funding streams. So in a smaller profession, these costs are going to be borne by a limited number of registrants, which is going to be farriers. The structural duplication, therefore, is sort of proportionately greater. It's a massive greater impact on our industry. So there's also a coordination question. So farriery depends on close alignment between regulation, education standards and examinations, CPD and professional development. So that alignment allows agility and consistency in our industry. If a separation is implemented, robust safeguards sort of it must ensure like strategic coordination, and embedded farriery expertise does remain intact. So without that, fragmentation risk increases. A smaller profession, it may see that their influence reduces sort of decisions infecting our scope of standard. So public confidence relies on independence, but also on stability, clarity, and proportional oversight. But if a profession of our size has two structures and two costs, this doesn't always mean the delivery has twice the benefit. This is it is going to be quite costly. I can see it's going to be quite costly. So as an association, we will submit a formal response, as we said, and it will be detailed, considered, and grounded in the long-term interest of farriery. And that does carry massive weight, but it can't just sit with the BFBA. So this affects the industry, it affects your license, your scope, and your livelihood. And the more farriers who respond thoughtfully and constructively, the stronger and clearer our collective position becomes. So consultations are shaped by volume, clarity, and evidence. So numbers genuinely matter, and professional voices really matter. And engagement, again, it matters. So if we do not engage, the decision will be made without us. So, and once legislation is set, it is extremely difficult to reverse. Scope shifts, scope shifts are rarely moved back, and structures, once embedded, they do not quietly unwind. This is not about panic. This is actually about sort of consequence. And moments like this, it does shape the long-term structure of our profession and our industry. So the question is really simple. What do you want farriery to look like in 10 or 20 years' time? And the one thing that I have learned is modernisation is not the enemy, but structural change without careful scrutiny does carry massive lasting implications, and it will on our industry if we don't think this through. So, like farriery didn't actually get here by accident. It was built by people who showed up and protected it. And we really genuinely don't get to sit this one out. If we want a say in where this profession goes next, this is the moment. So I would strongly encourage everyone and every farrier that's on here or listens to this recording is to reflect and respond calmly, professionally, and with the long-term interests of this profession in mind. We need to make sure that the farriery industry voice is clear and it's confident, and it really needs to be impossible to ignore. And the one thing I think we need to do is we don't need to be caught with our pants down. I genuinely believe we need to actually sit up and listen to this, and we need to reply. So I know this is really heavy, and I hope you're all still awake, but have we got any questions? The one question that I do want to ask, and if Sam Double is on here, is how would this affect our educational system? Is Sam on here?
Yeah, I am, Abby. I think we don't have a crystal ball, but if you look at the RCVS education standards framework for both veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses, I think you have a bit of a steer as to where you could be headed alongside all of the other allied professions that have been brought together, i.e. you will be under some sort of framework within the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons from an education perspective.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions, Holly?
Yeah, would you like me to just read them from the top?
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so we had the first question in was, if the Farriers Registration Act will become redundant, how are those responsible going to get a new bill through the government, considering that the very first Farriers Act was done as a private member's bill?
David Greenwood, would you be able to answer that?
Hello, Abby. Good evening, and good evening, everybody. The first thing to understand, I think, yes, as was pointed out by the first speaker, this has been 15, 20 years in the making. This hasn't just come round the corner as a sort of random thought. The first point to note is that consultations are not binding. So whatever comes out of this doesn't of itself guarantee anything. Government can adopt it in full. They can put it on the shelf and let the dust pile up on top of it. They can cherry pick the bits out of it they want. They can do anything they like. Consultation is about them saying to Parliament, we have consulted. And that's about the long and short of it. How it would move through Parliament is up for grabs. Points to note, firstly, new veterinary legislation was not a manifesto commitment of the current government. Secondly, it's not in the current business programme for this government. And third, it isn't in the current round of the King's Speech for legislation that's passing through this Parliament. So in legislative terms, right now, it isn't anywhere. So it could be adopted as a core legislative measure in the next King's Speech, something to watch out for in sort of late May, perhaps early June when that comes along. Or it could be picked up as a private member's bill, or it could be run as we did Farriers Registration Act 2017, which was a private member's bill through the ballot system. So there's any number of ways it could happen. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you how it's going to happen, but those are the options.
Thank you. Whilst you're on, I have had a question, but I'm not sure if I didn't quite cover that, is somebody's asked, what would the disciplinary process involve if passed through the proposal? Would you mind?
Well, you summed it up very well.
Yeah.
You would have a three-stage system, as is used by many other regulators, that will be more expensive to operate and take longer to dispose of cases. The five, I can't remember which slide it was, you had sort of five key proponents of their new system. The current system has all of those already. The average time taken by the FRC to bring a case from flash to bang is about 12 months. Other regulators who use this three-stage system measure case resolution in years, as in years plural. Go take a look at some of the cases on the Nursing and Midwifery Council site. 4 and 5 years is not uncommon for the resolution of a case. I would suggest to you that that is not in any registrant's interests, and it's not in a complainant's interests either. So, you may have a more sort of swept up system that consumes time, effort, and money. Is it going to deliver swifter outcomes? There is a principle, isn't there, that justice delayed is justice denied. So there's something to think carefully about there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Somebody has asked, who decides on fitness for us to practice? Will we need doctors' medical certificates?
The consultation is silent on it, but if you go if you look at how this is adopted, again, it's the medical regulators that have been running with this for most of the time. And yes, you may end up having to have doctor's certificates to prove fitness to practice or to evidence fitness to practice. You might also have the notion of a fit and proper persons test to be allowed to practice. In other words, If there's anything in your criminal background or other aspects of your behaviour that have taken place, you might not even be allowed to register in the first place. Because they will operate a fit and proper persons test. But in fairness, the consultation is silent on it. But look to the flanks, look at what other regulators that have gone this way are doing, and you'll find that many of these practices are in place.
Okay.
To be clear, I don't think there's any suggestion that anybody, vets are not going to need a note to their doctor before they can become a vet. All of this is about when somebody has a medical issue that might affect their fitness to practice. Say somebody had a really significant mental health problem, and there was that drew, there was therefore concerns about whether they were fit. So it's not going to be a doctor's note to be a farrier. I'm quite sure of that. Otherwise, we'd certainly be in trouble.
Oh, God. Yeah, no. So one of the questions here is moving farriers into a corporate structure could lead us open to maybe more suspension, prosecution in the event we make a mistake. Corporate backing influence can be negative to the industry. I can't see how. Would there be more, David, or would it be?
It's difficult to say because the consultation doesn't go into it in any detail.
No.
So it's probably not fair, really, to speculate.
No.
Other than if you're going to expand business regulation, it may have an impact on how you go about your business, and if you're breaching conditions that are imposed by the regulator, then that may have an effect on you as a practitioner.
Yeah, the one thing is, and actually you've said several times, and it has become apparent, is the document, it is very vague, and the questions are they're not farrier specific. They could be leading. They're very difficult to answer. It is really for us to put the detail in, and the devil is in the detail because there is no detail within the document.
I would encourage people. There are some free text boxes in there in the return. Don't feel constrained by what it is they're asking you to put. If you've got a message you want to deliver, then get it in the free text box and set it out, because it will then get to the end and hopefully somebody will read it.
Thank you. Malcolm, I've got one here that you might be able to answer. We've got, would there be any dispensation for smaller business or sole traders? Surely there must be some latitude in legislation. There are still plenty of small vets and sole traders within the veterinary sector.
Yeah, I'm sure that this is going to have to take into account a wide range of people. If we think that this is going to be about regulation for cattle foot trimmers and equine dental technicians, they're very far from big corporate veterinary practices. So much as David has said here, a lot of the detail is not in here. This is just a really high level document. And I don't think it spells that out, but it's not going to be fit for purpose unless it can regulate small businesses and sole traders. I think it's also fair to say that a lot of my colleagues in the veterinary profession would feel that there's many flaws in this consultation. A lot of the questions are kind of giving quite binary options. They might be confused in places. And it certainly feels to me, just personally, when I see what the consultation is asking about farriery, that it's quite binary questions about whether farriers should be part of this or not. Within the veterinary profession, whether you're part of a regulator or representative body, this has been discussed for so long. And for many in the farriery profession, I realise that this is a kind of sudden thing. Nobody's had time to think about it. And I do wonder whether there is a consultation response in here, which may be something along the lines of, the question you're asking is not the right one, just a sort of binary in or out, because clearly this legislation is it's got to be fit for the future. So new allied professions will come along over time working in the animal health sector. And I do wonder whether, even if farriers are not part of this to start with time, it may become apparent that this is a good thing to be involved with. The problem is we don't know at the moment, and it all feels really theoretical.
Yeah.
Can I just say that's a really perceptive comment, and one of the options that certainly the council is going to mention in its return is that there may be another way of doing this, whereby you adopt modernised veterinary legislation for vets and vet nurses, and then you create a regulator not unlike the Health and Care Professions Council, which deals for a multiplicity of smaller medical professionals that sit outside the GMC and the NMC. So, for example, paramedics, blood transfusion supply people, and such like sit under the HCPC, a collection of smaller professionals. And it may be that you could brigade all of the AVPs, the small population professional groups, in a regulator of the like-minded like that. But again, the government haven't even considered such an approach. And on the basis that we should try and embrace modernisation and moving things forward, that is a proposal that merits, we say, merits proper examination.
Thank you. Another question, financially, under a new reform, would we have to pay our registration fee to the FRC plus an extra fee to the new reform governance? Well, what they're talking about is getting rid of the FRC, but there's still got to be a regulatory body within that under the umbrella of the framework. So
yeah. If you stick with the status quo, there's no ambition on the part of the FRC to regulate businesses. We see that as massive regulatory overreach, certainly for farriers and arguably also for the AVPs. Remember this, the Competition and Markets Authority went after vets and vet nurses. They didn't go after AVPs, they went after greedy conglomerates who were sort of helping themselves to the public's wallet. There's no ambition in the current setup to regulate businesses. The best thing the regulator can do very often is know when to stay out of the way. If you move into a new system where businesses are being regulated, then you run the risk of paying not only a retention fee for you as a practitioner, but also forking out for having your business regulated as well. Whether that is presented as one fee or two fees is to play for, but I think the net cost arrow is an up arrow.
It's all going up. Yeah. It's going to be two things.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. So another question, if the reform introduces a license to practice, actually this might be Malcolm, will this mean that veterinary surgeons be required to hold recognised qualifications before performing acts of farriery or equine dentistry, or would they continue to be permitted just to carry out those procedures without any technical skill, test or specific training that they are now?
Yeah, really key thing about being a vet is that you do stuff within your competence. I might be a vet, but if you asked me to spay your cat, I would have no idea what I was doing. And so I think that certainly in terms of the farriery thing, I think the idea that there are many, I don't know of many vets who are sort of acting outside their competence in that area. I think in terms of equine dentistry, it's quite nuanced. A lot of vets who are working specifically in that area are extremely, experienced and are kind of leaders on it. So I think the crux of it is just acting within your competence, and that's a fundamental if you're a vet.
Yeah, thank you. One of the questions is, will we get to see the BFBA response, which was the same person? Yes, we are hoping to get something into the Forge magazine, whether it's the final response or kind of what direction we're going in or how we're perceiving to answer the questions. We're doing our very best to get that into this Forge magazine and on your doorstep as soon as we possibly can. Another question, how will they test the competency for the license? Will we have to do a diploma type extra exam every time we have to renew it? I wouldn't imagine it would be that, but again, sort of the devil is in the detail. There is no detail within that. There is no detail within this document. I can't answer that. I don't think anyone else can answer that at this precise moment in time.
If you took renewal at its most literal, it would be the presentation of an invoice for payment, a check that you're up to date with your CPD, a check that you're up to date with the annual return, and that's it. If you take it at its most literal, that is probably what it means. What you need to watch out for is things like recertification, which is not posited yet, but other regulators have gone in that direction, and requalification. Again, some regulators in some specialisms, almost entirely in the medical world, have gone in that direction. And of course, that opens up a whole Pandora's box of activity and cost. Emphasize it's not there yet, but one thing tends to lead to another.
What was the other thing? There are many questions. So if farriers and other professionals are moved under the RCVS regulation, will this mean that the Veterinary Act will be rewritten to cover all of those professions? Yes. Or will it have smaller amendments and they will try and slip us all in under the umbrella somehow? What I spoke to the DEFRA lady, and the one thing that she did stipulate is that farriers would be under a hoof care umbrella. But our examinations would be our examinations. And that was all she could really tell me on that. But, we would be under our CVS regulation, and it would be under their act. But we would be not a separate entity. We're going to be under a foot care umbrella. We're going to be in with a sort of barefoot trimmers and anyone else sort of within that. Would you say that's about right, David?
Yes, I was having a conversation with the same lady a while back, and I said, you do realise that eventually, if you go this way, there will be a large department that deals with equines, and within that you're going to end up with what I called a below the knee department, which will incorporate farriers, trimmers, physios, and so on and so forth. So again, the detail is not there in the consultation, but one can easily imagine that underneath the main legislation there is a whole load of other supporting minor bits, perhaps secondary legislation, and buried in there somewhere will be sort of stuff that deals with equines below the knee.
Okay. And so one of the questions here is, how would change affect farriers outside of the UK wishing to travel to the UK for continuing education, taking exams, competitions, and those not desiring to set up a practice in the UK?
I mean, it's again, we're silent. Of course, the Farriers Registration Act is silent on that. We operate temporary licenses as a discretion, not as a statutory matter. If overseas people want to come and live and work here permanently, then there's a registration issue involved. But if they want to come for short periods, I don't know if Malcolm can tell us how the vets deal with that currently. But as you know, we operate a discretionary temporary license scheme within the world of farrier right now.
Thank you. I think there's one here from, I think, Malcolm. So the CMA didn't get after vets and vet nurses. If it went after veterinary businesses, 60% of which are not owned by vets, would barefoot trimmers be included in these reforms?
Yeah, I think it's a really positive thing that one of the proposals is to regulate barefoot trimmers. I'm looking at this from a veterinary perspective. There's many different areas within animal health care which need better regulation. I think that there's some of the questions in here, as people saying, I'm not sure we want to be regulated by the vets. Just to be really clear, this is going to be wouldn't be a Veterinary Surgeons Act. It's not even guaranteed that there'll still be a Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. This is probably talking about a regulator at a higher level. And I would hope that any allied profession that is part of this would have the option to have a voice within that regulator. So it's not just about the vets regulating the farriers. This could well be people who are from any allied profession or farriers, if they were involved, having a role within that regulator. So, I think one person who's worth bringing in here who commented about the sort of drivers of the CMA. I don't know if Liz wants to comment. Liz is the current Senior Vice President of BVA, and I think she might well have some interesting perspectives on some of this.
That would be really brilliant.
Abby, that was truly amazing. I feel like I need to hire you. That was fantastic, as is the turnout actually this evening from you all. So thanks very much for the invite to be here. It's been incredibly interesting. I've been BVA's representative on what DEFRA called the sprints, which pulled together this consultation the consultation. I'd say they've really kept the whole farrier issue at arm's length to us. Every time we've asked about it, we've been told there are separate discussions going on. So we've had when you read this, that group that pulled the consultation together, farriers have not been mentioned to us. So we've really not had, a say in that. I think, as Malt was hinting at there, I think we've really shifted the way we think about this as vets. We don't think about things being vet-led. We very much do think of it as being part of a team, and definitely under a Reform Act, it will be a team of veterinary professionals, of which farriers might be part, if that's the way you choose to go. And this concept that you'll be regulated by vets, I think, is wrong as well. What we'll probably have is, if we keep the Royal College, a Royal College of Veterinary Services, and, everybody within that will have equal representation. Our veterinary nursing colleagues in particular are really strong on, they don't want to feel that the minority partners to vets. So, if you look at the models for regulation, there should be opportunity for every profession to have a say about its profession. I think there were a few comments about, sort of like your day one competencies, things that will get you on the register. And I think for all the allied professionals, the majority of those aren't acts of veterinary surgery. All the other things that make farriers really great. And there were some comments about vets doing equine dentistry when we're not as good as equine dentists, most of us aren't anyway. So your day one competencies and the whole thing about farriery, it will only now and again touch on those acts of veterinary surgery that some of us, whether we're vets or we're trained professionals, will be able to do. So we're actually finding, when we talk to the veterinary profession, there's a fear here about us losing something, that we're losing our profession and our college in just the same way you've been describing. And that's a hard one to align, because we do want this. We like the idea of regulation that pulls in all the people we work with, but I think all of us are a bit fearful of change, and we're all a bit fearful of what we might lose. And to you it probably doesn't seem like we're losing as much, but there are some really fundamental things about being a vet that are up to be lost, and we're having some of the same issues that you're having, deciding how far we want to this to go. So yeah, thank you for inviting us it's been really, really useful, really helpful.
Thank you very much for that. I've got one here. Hang on. So who is going to make a new regulation for the equine podiatrists when there is no legal requirement to be qualified? Again, they'll be brought under the same umbrella as us, but they'll have to have their own exam standard. Is that right? There will be an exam standard for them produced that they would then have to take. Am I right in that, David?
Well, forgive me again. The consultation is silent, but one imagines that for each of the sort of sub professions, if you like, there would need to be a standard with an assessment plan or a
Yeah.
qualification that sits behind it, because you have to have you would be able to measure people's competence against a standard. So it's difficult to see how they would avoid that.
And there was another question just whilst you're there. Would there be space within the FRC framework to include barefoot trimmers in order to bring them into some form of compliance competency?
It's been the ambition of the council to regulate barefoot trimming for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
When we got 2017 Act on the drawing board, we went to visit an ATF down in Devon, and the then Secretary of State was with us. And having made a horseshoe under the tuition of an apprentice, he said, could the FRC take on the regulation of barefoot trimmers if that was brought about? And the answer was a resounding yes. And we even described to him how we could do it. Since then, there's been no political traction or will to go down this road. But could the FRC do it? Yes. Could we extend the provision to Northern Ireland with the deletion of one sentence from the current legislation? Yes. You're limited by your imagination.
Thank you. Someone has asked, do we know when this will be complete? Speaking to the DEFRA lady, so after this consultation, DEFRA will put this forward as a bid. So they're hoping to do that in spring 2027. And what she said about that was that will go across government process. And then that will be put forward and hopefully they'll get a slot, is what they were saying. So they'll then have Parliament ping pong between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And once that's approved and moves forward to the Royal Court, that they were hoping will go from a bill to an act. And they're hoping that will be in 2028, 2029. That was the timeline that the DEFRA gave me on Monday. But actually, to be fair, as Malcolm said, this has taken like nearly 10 years to get to this point, hasn't it, Malcolm? So,
Yeah, but I think the CMA is going to be a really strong driver. When we see a government department saying that there's a really strong need for legislative reform, you'll see that a lot of MPs are, that if their inboxes get full of something, they tend to do something about it. And their constituents are bothered about things like the CMA. And actually, that's quite separate from this. The CMA's investigation is just saying this needs reform. It's not the focus of the CMA. But within the veterinary sector, people are using that momentum to try to get this parliamentary time. What David was saying there, there's people aren't going to reform legislation unless the MPs think that there's a reason to do it. And I think the CMA is what will make this happen. Can I just ask a question though, Abby? We heard about Northern Ireland there, and I know colleagues who are vets who work in Northern Ireland really struggle with the fact that there isn't the regulation of farriers there. That's obviously a separate issue to this. What else can we do about that?
Can I answer that one?
yeah.
I think you could encourage in the short term that the FRA be expanded to incorporate farriers in Northern Ireland, and I wasn't being flippant. With the removal of one sentence, the legislation would incorporate it. And given that there's, it's an ambitious timeline for this future veterinary legislation, 2028, 29, and so on, there's no reason why, if government get a consistent message from stakeholders that this is a preferred direction of travel, that can't be attended to in quite short order. And we can get on with bringing them into the fold and extending animal welfare in the farrier world into Northern Ireland.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Malcolm?
Yep, no, that's good. I think it's great to have it on the agenda. It's a really good, this is like a catalyst for raising that, isn't it?
Yeah. One thing I was going to ask, and I was going to ask Jason Sims, how has this fallen in Scotland? I know you had a meeting in Scotland. What was the sort of common outlook on it from there?
I think the
Chase?
same, a lot of it's been the same as being what's discussed this evening. I think there's a lot of confusion as to what this means to farriers and to farrier businesses. And I think the one that you've certainly caught me out with, and I think the same with David Greenwood, was this much shorter time frame than I think most of us probably imagined, especially
Yeah.
with it now being triggered with the or pushed forward the CMA side of it. But the absolutely, I think it's across the board that the everyday farrier just doesn't know, and I don't. I think this evening, and certainly I'm going to kind of join everyone else and say it was really clear and obvious what you said on your presentation, and broke it down into useful bite-sized bits. But we need to go away as an industry now and think about that and see what we want. But yeah, it's just this unknown, and it'd be interesting to know what the sort of age group joined this meeting was. At the risk of being ageist looking across the screen, it is definitely the older people, and arguably we're going to be potentially less affected by it. You know, the guys who
Yeah.
should be here and engaging with this process are, you know, the pre-middle agers.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really what it was. Is and even after that, there's still just this lack of understanding of what it actually means, because it's such a massive piece of legislation in relation to our industry. So yeah,
It's huge.
yeah,
It's huge. And the thing is, the more I've kind of dealt, I'm no politician, and this document is massive. It's not something that I ever genuinely thought I'd have to kind of really understand and read from cover to cover. But the one thing that I do feel slightly worried about is that we are slightly a pimple on an orange and a bit of an afterthought. But again, as somebody did point out, we are named rather than an allied profession. We are farriery industry. So yeah, that is one thing that I am slightly worried about, that we are a pimple on a very large orange and kind of an afterthought. But actually, the document is so vague that it's just another vague thing within the whole system.
An
Another
answer to
question.
your point there, Abby. I mean, I
Yeah,
think as somebody who's been in equine practice for a long time, one of the greatest things, the cold face of it is the collaboration between vets and farriers. I think that there's a huge amount of room for collaboration here. If you say you feel like you're a pimple on an orange, there's a lot of different allied professions, the veterinary profession, and the veterinary profession actually has really stuck up for registered vet nurses in this, arguing their points. I think trying to engage with BVA, the representative body of the veterinary profession, and just making sure that they understand your perspective, I think that's a good thing to do. So working together, just trying to understand each other.
cool. Thank you. Holly, I have run out of questions on what I've got. Have you got any more there?
Yeah.
Are you all right to find those? I can't find
Yeah.
them.
Of course. Who's going to make new?
Abby, could I offer a thought that chimes with what was just said,
Yeah.
which is that this consultation that closes on the 25th of March is not the end of anything. And to misapply Churchill, it's not even the beginning. There is so much to follow in refining this and producing all those many detailed things that we've discussed this evening, where at the moment there are no answers.
Yeah.
And that's before it even gets into drafting a bill. And then you get into the committee stage in Parliament and giving evidence before committees. This has got legs. So this is not even the rolling of the credits at the beginning of the film. There is so much more to come, and we should pace ourselves, and we should think about as Malcolm just said, how do we engage together collegiately to make sure the right messages go into DEFRA as we move down the road? So this is not all over on the 25th of March, far from it.
Thank you. One of the things that has come in is, what is the real risk to farriery, blurred boundaries? So if the act of veterinary surgery are defined without clear protection for farriery, certain procedures could end up, I can't see the rest of that message. I think Phoebe sent that. Phoebe, have you got that message, that question?
No, that was just me trying to kind of highlight the main concerns tonight. So it was our scope of practice, when the Veterinary Act, how they're going to be defined and how that affects the state of day, increased regulatory burden, financial burden, and kind of confusion to the market of who's qualified for what. These are all things that I got as bullet points of what I want to put in my response to the consultation. I think, like you said, if it's consultation, these things need highlighting now before they're set in stone.
And the one thing, like we said earlier, is we're going to put as much of this we can in the Forge magazine. We've got Sarah Shepherd on here as well, taking notes, and we'll have as much definition and as many answers as we can to these questions in black and white, so that you can sit down and look at it in your own leisure or pleasure. Not that this is leisure or pleasure, really. One question that I have just found is, as an industry, if we said we don't want anything to do with this, what would happen? This is happening without a shadow of a doubt. How you structure the answers and how you answer them, it is really important. I will have to put that to David. I can't have explain that very well.
So I can't remember the number of the question number. It might be 15 or something, where it says should farriers be part of this or shouldn't they? And I think the corollary, and again, it's not explicit, is that if we weren't part of it, then it would be business as usual as we are under current arrangements. I think I can say with confidence the council would still have aspirations to bring trimmers into the regulatory orbit of the FRC if that were the solution, for obvious reasons. We would still have an ambition to extend regulation into Northern Ireland for reasons that have been set out many times over. So those aspirations wouldn't be dimmed. But the current stance of regulating the practitioner would remain the same. I don't detect in the council any great ambition to start regulating businesses.
Thank you. I've got a question here. Could registrants possibly face financial sanction as part of a disciplinary process if the proposed changes go ahead? Again, the devil is in the detail, and there's not enough detail. It's not enough detail in there.
It's not in there, but again, look to others. There are regulators, again, in the medical world, I think, where fines can be applied. We don't currently. The FRC doesn't have that power. Somebody else will know better than I whether the RCVS currently has that power. I don't think so. But where other regulators have gone, it might follow. But again, it's silent on the matter. It doesn't say.
No. Again, it's in the detail, and there is none, is there?
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Abby,
Lydia has her hand up.
Yeah, I want to pop in. Abby, thank you very much. There are just a couple of points, really. One is it's probably helpful for people if they go on the RCVS website. They've got a sort of time for change page or something like that, and they have a lot of videos and stuff explaining what they're talking about. And also in the consultation, there are a couple of annexes which are transcripts of videos that they've produced, which explain in detail how fitness to practice and license to practice would work. So we do have the information on that. In fact, they're currently doing fitness to practice at the moment. And the only other off-the-wall thing I wanted to add, because everything else has been said, is that let's remember there are 2 veterinary MPs in the House of Commons, and they're both equine vets. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That is really helpful. And actually, I hadn't thought to say that. You know, we do need to know where all this information is. If anyone's got any other useful points, I'd really appreciate it if you spoke forward. You know, the questions on here have been absolutely fantastic this evening. Has anyone else got any questions, any hands up? I can't see all of the screen. Can anyone see any hands up? Here. If the consultation period finishes on the 25th of March, will there be enough time for the BFBA's position to be published in the Forge prior to this date? Yes. This is what we're heading to do. It should be on your doorstep before then. Holly, when does it come through? I know we've got the dates set out specifically so that you've got this information.
Yes, so I know I was talking to Sarah earlier in the week, and she's hoping to have everything done to go to print next week. So it should be hopefully just landing just before. So ideally the weekend just before the 25th. So like the 22nd, hopefully 22nd, 23rd, which I know is not a lot of time for everybody to be able to read the full document and then get their answers across using that information. But at least it's something.
Perfect. Anyone else got any other questions? Because I am very aware that this is moments of your family time that we're all taking up. And I'm also exceptionally grateful that how many people have turned up. And I'm hoping that this has been, you know, informative, as well as, you know, what we are hoping is people don't have a knee-jerk reaction. You really sit back and think about answering this you know, calmly. What I did want to do actually ask Linda is, what is the WCF's view on this? Where are you kind of going with this? I know everybody's kind of going through their consultations and massive meetings, but have you got anything sort of you can give us that you're kind of leading towards?
Yes, I think so. I mean, just want to say that, like yourself, Abby, we're trying to consult with everybody. We've got working group going through. Exactly like BFBA, we see positives and negatives, and I love the way you presented it as benefits and risks. But because, funnily enough, that kind of modus operandi is what we've been doing, and we haven't actually come to a final conclusion yet. But I wouldn't be a bit surprised if all of us aren't on the same page on this at the end of the day. Bit of reassurance for you, perhaps.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really kind. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Yeah, as I was saying, it really is important that it's important that the FRC and the BFBA, the Worshipful Company, you know, all these associations and companies, it carries clout that we reply to this consultation, but volume really does matter. So the more people that reply to this, the better. We do need our farriery voices to be heard, and we don't want it to be ignored. And, you know, this is going to happen, but we do need it to be guided in the way that we want it. And we want our industry to look like we want it to look, and not how other industries perceive it. And it's important that we have farriery or, you know, the skill set sat on the board, so that we really are actually, you know, a strong industry that, and still stand alone. I think, you know, we do need to stand alone. Because, you know, we've worked within the veterinary profession, but we've spent many years becoming an equal and working hard to be an equal. And it would be very sad if we actually then became an underdog, really. Any other questions before I kind of, you know, say goodbye and thank you very much for coming? Anything else, Phoebe? We're all good. Nothing else.
I just wondered if Jo from RAMP was here, from an allied
She is.
veterinary professional. She has some good thoughts on this, just as an afterthought.
Jo is here. I've seen her somewhere.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry I was late. I said that I was on another webinar tonight, and I was really sorry to have missed your presentation, Abby, which I think has been brilliant. But thanks for the invite. Yeah, so I'm RAMP, and we are a voluntary regulatory body for physiotherapists, chiropractors, and osteopaths. And yes, we are quite similar in many ways to the farriers in that we have recognised professions that are separate from the veterinary profession. But we very much would like to work as a more integrated model. And I think you're quite privileged as farriers, really, because I think you work already in a much more integrated position throughout the whole country than probably we do as physios, chiros, and osteos at present, because we have had no regulation in animal care at all. And so that has provided quite a lot of suspicion in the industry and varied standards. So that suspicion has been quite warranted. But our main view on the consultation is that we need to get allied health, which I think probably farriery would come into as well, because defined as a separate entity from a veterinary act. And you'll look at the consultation and you can see that the veterinary act is there, and quite right and proper that should be for vets, and vet nurses are part of that. But we would be very keen to have allied health defined in the primary legislation, so as that we've got a foundation for creating our own scope of practice, first aid competencies, industry standards, because I don't think that we fit neatly into doing little bits of a veterinary act. And equally, if we are doing allied health professional work, then the vets shouldn't have to take responsibility for our work. If we're saying that we are qualified, competent, safe professionals that are fully regulated and accountable to a statutory regulator, then the veterinary profession shouldn't have to take responsibility for the work we do. The regulatory obligations should ensure competency and safe practice for the animals. And I feel if we can work much more closely in that interdisciplinary model, that we will have a better system for providing that care for animals from everybody. But so we're trying to very definitely ask that in the primary legislation that allied health is defined as a separate under a separate description, and therefore we can go on and set our scopes from there. So that was one thing. We're very keen that we can maintain our standards, we set our standards equivalent to those that are set in human care. So we're very keen for that to happen. And most modern regulatory structures are separate from that leadership body. And I'm not understanding really the option one that is being put on the table, that is being promoted quite hard by both the RCVS and DEFRA. I don't quite understand where they think that that's going to work, that's particularly different from what we've got now, other than the board or the council would be made up of other professions. So I'm not sure how that's working. We're still communicating with different professional associations in our industry, but also with other disciplines, and we're trying to make a considered view on that, because we're just still not sure that combined structure is going to work into the future. So these are our main.
Thank you so much anyway for giving us your input and your side of how you're dealing with it, and paraprofessionals. What I do want to remind everybody is that this is being recorded. So if you want to go back and recap, or there's anything, you might have missed, if you're bored one night, you can listen. And as I say, we're going to put everything through the forge as much as we can and keep you all informed as much as we possibly can. But I would like to say thank you ever so much for coming, and we won't hold you anymore. But we probably will call another meeting at some point at a later date so that we can keep everybody in the loop and as sort of as educated as we possibly can. So I would like to just call this the end of the meeting unless anyone else has anything to say. Phoebe, are you all good? Nothing to add? No one's got anything to add?
Thank you, Jo.
Thank you ever so much for coming and giving us your time, and we will look forward to hearing your responses. And if anyone's got any questions, please don't hesitate to send a message into the office or to one of the EC, and we will try and do our best to answer it. Okay, thank you very much and good night.